So welcome back to the last session, and we'll begin as usual with uh, our motivation and then some breathing meditation. And we'll go into another motivation, and then we'll begin. So take a moment to visualize Buddha Shakyamuni in the space in front.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. 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 Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha.
So let's take a moment to cultivate a bodhicitta, strong bodhicitta motivation. And just reflecting how wherever there are sentient beings, living beings, there are afflictions in that mind. And most likely when there are afflictions, there are negative actions, afflicted actions, contaminated actions. And as a result of those actions, there's dukkha, there's suffering. And so this is the condition of all living beings to one degree or another. And it's said in many of the scriptures, the Mahayana scriptures, that there is no sentient being who we have not had a relationship with in previous lives. So that's something we need to test for ourselves, come to understand for ourselves. But just imagine if every living being, we'd had some relationship with them when we found them to be very dear to us, very kind, someone we wanted to benefit, wanted to repay their kindness. We can imagine that each sentient being has played the role of our parent in some previous life, someone who really cared for us and cherished us. And so naturally, when we can cultivate that sense of closeness, a sense of connection and affection, we naturally want to help. And so all these beings, they're drowning in the ocean of samsara without a reliable refuge. And so for a moment, just cultivate a heart of loving kindness. How wonderful it would be if they met with happiness and the causes of happiness. And not just fleeting, temporary sense pleasures, but real deep, lasting, abiding happiness and well-being. How wonderful if every living being were to be able to develop that. How wonderful if all these beings were free from every level of suffering, never to experience suffering again. So in that way we cultivate compassion. And then we can build on this loving kindness and compassion, really wishing to take upon ourselves the responsibility to actually bring that about for these beings who we have some sense of affinity with, some affection. But if we check right now, our capacity is quite limited in being able to do that for more than maybe a few people in our lives. But when we check who's able to bring this about for all living beings, it's Buddhas, those who have already completely purified their minds of all the obscurations, all the afflictions, and who've developed all good qualities to their utmost extent, and have enlightened abilities to be able to help every sentient being wherever they are in their development, in their predispositions with their karma. So for a moment, really cultivate that wish or that thought, how wonderful it would be if I could attain full awakening to be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. And then with a sense of responsibility, a sense of determination, think, I will do that. I have the potential to do that. And I will make all the steps I can in this lifetime to be able to benefit as many beings as I possibly can, to bring about an enlightened state. So see if you can cultivate that bodhicitta, vast bodhicitta motivation. Okay. So there are two questions, one from Jeffrey and also one here on the table. And luckily I was planning to talk about both of them today, so that worked out well. All right. So Jeffrey, it sounded like, you want to repeat your question? Do you remember it?
I think okay, I remember what I was asking. Okay, it was about when you were navigating attachment and working through it, how do we find the right balance between pushing ourselves and, to act differently in spite of what our body or mind might be urging us to do, and then having compassion for where we're at, basically. And I don't know, recognizing that sometimes this is a long process, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so how to find balance and how to push yourself but not overly push yourself. How do we? And how to avoid guilt. Yeah. Okay. In the mornings when we do the purification practice, often people will make a distinction for us, help us to make that distinction. Regret is very clean. We recognize we've done something negative, and we know that if we don't purify it, we're going to experience a negative result, an unwanted result. And so in that moment, we can recognize I made a mistake, I'm going to rectify it now, and I'm going to put it down. That's very clean, very matter of fact in a way, very logical. Guilt is never letting ourselves off the hook. And it's an unrealistic way of thinking, because we can purify our minds. Just as we create negativity with our mind, it stands to reason that we can also purify negativity from our mind, I think. That makes sense to me. So that's one way of thinking about the difference between clean, clear regret and guilt, where we're holding some exaggerated image of ourselves, like we can never atone for our sins. And the more we flog ourselves, the more we purify, or something like that. So that's one aspect of your question. And then as far as the other part of your question, this came up, something similar came up when we were going through the Transforming Problems series of teachings. And it seems like for a lot of us, there's a period in our Dharma practice when we have enough intellectual knowledge to recognize and understand different levels of suffering, and that our suffering arises from our own mind, our afflictions. And that's going to require some change on our part, but it's also quite humbling how much it requires. And so we're trying to figure out how much do we push ourselves, how much do we, respect the process that it, can we leave it at more of an organic process. And so when our understanding is still mostly at an intellectual level, that can lead to a sense of kind of despair and desolation, like, if I let go of my attachment to happiness, where am I going to find happiness? Because I don't yet know the bliss of liberation, and it's way too far in the future. So it's like we're letting go of one ring in the trapeze, but we can't even see the next one yet. But we're kind of forcing ourselves to let go before we're ready, in a way. So there's a push, there's a bit of aggression in that. And I think it just shows that we are in the process of integrating what we've learned intellectually, but we haven't quite built the foundation that we need yet to go forward. And so we need to prove to ourselves that there is something that we can benefit from right now. We don't have to wait till we get the bliss of liberation. There are things that we can focus on right now to prove to ourselves that this is a very worthwhile path. And do that in a balanced way, not in a forceful way. So, maybe some of you are feeling that little bit of shakiness after pummeling ourselves with some attachment, looking into attachment so intently this weekend. So as I said, this came up in our teachings, and I think it's not unusual for people to feel very zealous at the beginning of their Dharma practice and really want to do some kind of a little bit of an ascetic trip, like turn away from attachment is bad. I'm going to turn away from it now. Never touch it again. I'm going to let go of all my pleasures and, do something like that. But that doesn't work because it's forced. It's not natural. And actually, I appreciated what Venerable Nawang brought up in that conversation, and that he had found some elements of that in his practice, but and he found it wasn't working. It was creating more suffering and stress, and like pushing, like you were mentioning. And so what he found is that as he continued with just doing his daily practice, building that foundation, that instead of forcing himself to push away the things that he was used to finding pleasure in, that they started to naturally shift. There was an organic process with that. It wasn't something that needed to be forced. And so that may take us a while to trust that. But as Venerable Chodron has often said, and other teachers too, that we do well to be content with creating the causes. We can really trust that as we create causes, we will get results. They just might be a little slower than we wish. So in our tradition, we focus a lot on what's called the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment. And what I love about it is that it's so logically laid out that there are things that people typically considered beginners can start with. I mean, well, it's a little bit of a misnomer because the Lam Rim is for people who've actually done a lot of study. But it's kind of laid out in a systematic way of someone starting at the beginning and going all the way through to full awakening, in theory. It assumes a lot of knowledge already, like rebirth and having some understanding of that and continuity of mind and things like that. But when we study the Lam Rim, and we have to cycle through that many, many times, it's not just a one-time shot, but keep going back to these topics. So there's the initial scope and those practices like learning about karma, turning away from the 10 non-virtues and taking refuge, learning about lower realms. Those sorts of things help us then to create the causes for the first goal that we have, which is to make sure we're creating causes for a good rebirth. All of us can do that in this lifetime, no doubt about it. We can all stop killing. I guarantee we can all, intentional killing. We might still step on things or drive and kill bugs when we're driving, but we can all do that. And we can turn away from stealing. These are no-brainers. These are like common sense ethical actions that we can do. With some intention, we can all turn away from an unwise and unkind sexual behavior. And then the verbal ones are a little more difficult. So we have to put more effort into those. But, cleaning up our verbal act as well. And then starting to work more at the level of mental actions. So if we really put a lot of our study on that at the beginning and also purification practices, we're going to get a good start. We're going to start seeing some changes in ourselves ethically and how people respond to us. But even though we're creating causes for a good rebirth, that's not enough, right? So we need to go to the next step and start working at the level of our mind, really looking at the afflictions very thoroughly and start antidoting them. Developing, and this is, like what we're doing this weekend. That's why this weekend is so challenging, is that we're kind of looking at the middle scope practices, and that's where we find the Four Noble Truths. And it's not pleasant to look at suffering. It's just not for any of us, It's not something we just voluntarily spend our time doing. But when you understand the value of it and the benefit of it, the purpose of it, then you want to really understand, what is my situation in samsara? And that's hard to do because we're so addicted to seeing things a certain way and assuming that if I could just tweak my life a little bit more, I'm sure I'd be happy. If I just found the right fill in the blank, I'd be happy. Job or career or partner, whatever it is. But that's where we need to spend a lot of time so that we actually can start developing renunciation or this determination to be free of cyclic existence. And that's not something outside of ourselves. Cyclic existence is our own mind our own body and mind, controlled by karma and afflictions. So each of us have to overcome our own samsara. It's our responsibility. No one can do it for us. And that takes a lot of time, but that's so valuable because really, that's like self-compassion. That's real self-compassion. When we want to free ourselves from suffering, that is real self-compassion. Wishing I were free from suffering. And that's the foundation we actually need to develop bodhicitta. If we don't have that renunciation, we will not have valid bodhicitta, which from a Mahayana point of view, that aspiration to achieve full awakening, we won't be able to fulfill our aspirations for full awakening, for enlightenment. So these steps are laid out so clearly. There are texts that really emphasize the initial scope to a great degree, and then not so much about the middle and great scope. And then there are other series of books that really emphasize the great scope, not so much about the initial and middle scope. So there are a lot of different Lam Rim texts or graduated stages of the path texts. And in our tradition, that's what we rely on to build that very strong foundation. And then we're ready to go on to some of the more advanced practices, whether that's, in our tradition, it's like highest yoga tantra practices or Dzogchen or Mahamudra, things like that. But without that good, strong, solid foundation, it's going to be difficult to really engage with some of those higher practices because we don't have the causes. Yeah. So I think the upshot is that we don't need to push ourselves to let go of anything we're not ready to let go of, but rather, be intentional. We can set strong motivations even though we're not ready to fulfill them. Like that's what we're doing with our motivations. We're setting very vast motivations and intentions, even though most of us won't accomplish those for a long, long time, many lives. But we're planting seeds, and those seeds this is one of the beautiful characteristics of karma, is that karma does not go to waste. It doesn't just disappear unless we damage it, intentionally damage it, or not even intentionally, but we can damage our virtue by getting angry, things like that. We can damage our non-virtuous seeds by purifying, rendering them incapable of giving rise to their full effect. So that's what comes to my mind. Anyone want to add anything to that? In addition to that, so after that class, Venerable Kunchog came up with, he took some time to identify a list of joyful experiences from his practice. And I was really happy you did that, because it was a real good food for thought. And these are things that we could easily miss if we're not looking for them, if we're not identifying them and valuing them. Because, as I was saying in that class, sense pleasures they're kind of sexy. We can take a picture of them and put them on Instagram usually, but we can't do that so much with our Dharma practice. It's harder to really, pinpoint, why am I so attracted to the Dharma? What am I getting out of this? So I'm just going to read you Venerable Kunchog's list, and I encourage you to make your own list. What is your experience? What can you write down? What can you identify as the experiences you've had and you've identified that keep you on this path and keep you going? So this is what he came up with. He says, there's the joy of blamelessness that comes from living an ethical life. Can you relate to that? There's a real joy to that, isn't there? There's a blamelessness, I like that, or blameworthiness. When we refrain from the 10 non-virtues and we keep our precepts well, we can feel good about ourselves. It brings a sense of integrity and self-confidence. The joy of freedom from unwholesome states of mind. The mind abides more and more often in virtuous states. The joy of cultivating positive thoughts towards others. What a concept. Really thinking about the good qualities of others, or thinking about the affection that we feel for others. The joy of developing the altruistic intention, the wish to benefit all others without exception. And this really helps to counter and antidote our anxious, self-centered mind. And that brings a lot of joy. The joy of experiencing more equanimity towards different people and situations. And we spend a lot of time looking at how habitually we identify friend, enemy, and stranger just immediately. As soon as we meet somebody, we're putting them into boxes, into categories. And how those categories really aren't based on anything valid other than like maybe an initial impulsive judgment or one small interaction. So more equanimity towards others. The joy of having a less reactive and more flexible mind. Can you feel that one? It's such a relief to have a less reactive mind. The joy and inspiration that comes from following in the Buddha's footsteps. The joy of being in the present moment and less caught up in proliferation about the past and the future. The joy of having calm the body and mind when we practice calm abiding or concentration in general. The joy of sense restraint. We feel less agitation due to exercising more control over our senses and what they come in contact with. The joy of contentment from living a simple life, having fewer desires, fewer possessions to protect and be anxious about. If you have lots of things, lots of possessions at home, you can come spend time with us. We'll give you a taste of a simple life. The joy of becoming one's own best friend and enjoying our own company. You know, I think that goes along with being comfortable in our own silence. Well, it's not really silent in there, is it? But being comfortable with not always talking or always filling up the space with sound, turning on the radio, the TV, those sorts of things, or the internet. The joy of feeling grateful for present conditions of freedom and fortunes of this precious human rebirth. The joy that comes from sustained application for being curious and investigating the Dharma. The joy of experiencing the teachings for oneself, realizing more and more their truth, and understanding their potential to put an end to suffering. You know, when we can start reducing, especially, it's so obvious with anger, much more obvious with anger than attachment, but when we start getting intentional about lessening the anger, it's such a relief, isn't it? Yeah. And the longer we follow this path, the joy that comes from ripening of good karma accumulated through previous virtuous actions. Beautiful, huh? Thank you, Venerable Kuncho. You've given us a good start. And now we need to look into our own experience and see what's true for us. I found a quote from Volume 3 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion that I think really sums this up nicely. It's on page 60. His Holiness and Venerable Children write, "With all this talk about dukkha, we may mistakenly believe that Dharma practitioners must relinquish all of the usual activities that bring them happiness and instead practice extreme asceticism and self-denial. We may fear that there is no happiness to be experienced until we reach nirvana. But this is not the case at all. In fact, it's important to have a happy mind while practicing the Dharma." Make a note of that. As we go deeper into practice, we realize that there are many types and levels of happiness and pleasure. Having food, shelter, clothing, medicine, and friends brings us some well-being, enough that we can practice the Dharma without being in dire suffering, which would make practice difficult. As we practice more, we discover the internal peace arising from living ethically and the pleasant, relaxed feeling that comes from improving our concentration. As we lessen our attachment and open our hearts to others, the joy derived from connecting with others on a heart level and acting with kindness towards them brings us a sense of fulfillment that is greatly superior to any sense pleasure that money or possessions can afford. That's pretty clear, isn't it? So any comments about that? Did that answer your question? Okay, good. Doesn't that make you kind of go, yum, yum? I had intended to talk about relationships and do some exploration about relationships, but I didn't get that far. And it requires a lot of thought, I think. And so I have pulled together some cursory thoughts about that. But there's a lot more that we could plumb about this, so just keep that in mind. So let's talk about, and this is the note that was up here, can you specifically talk about more about the difference between love and attachment? So we've looked at attachment. Hopefully we have a clear idea of what that means. And the main difference is that love is really about the other person. I wish for you to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So it's based on valid reasoning and logic. It is possible for all beings to have happiness. We all have Buddha potential. From a Buddhist point of view, that's what we say. We all have Buddha potential. We have the potential to purify all the obscurations from our mind that cause suffering, and the potential to develop all the positive qualities limitlessly, which brings about a pretty consistently blissful, happy mind. So we all have that potential. So wishing for someone to have happiness and its causes is a valid wish, a valid aspiration. It's based on logic and reasoning. And as we've seen, attachment is more like, I want you to make me happy. I have expectations of you. So you better live up to them and make me happy. Otherwise, I won't be happy, and you'll know about it. We'll share that with others. So it's a little embarrassing to see this in our relationships, but it's there. And often there's a mixture, and that's what makes it so difficult to work with, is that our love and our attachment are mixed. Or they come right on the heels of each other, moment of love, moment of attachment, moment of love, moment of attachment, like they're mixed up. And that's what makes our relationships so messy, is that we do love people. We clearly have love for people. We have good qualities. We don't only have attachment, anger, and ignorance. We have good qualities, all of us. And we have a lot of seeds for those good qualities. We just need to water them and encourage them. And so that's what we're trying to do. I like this image of the scale. We're trying to increase the weight of our good qualities, genuine loving kindness and compassion. We're trying to lessen the opposite attachment, or the opposite affliction, or the opposing affliction, the competing affliction. Yeah. It's so easy to say and so difficult to do. I like the way Sharon Salzberg talks about this in her book, Loving Kindness. That's a nice resource about love. She says, in our culture, when we talk about love, we usually mean either passion or sentimentality. It is crucial to distinguish love from both of these states. Passion, or we could say, states of mind afflicted with attachment, I think, is enmeshed with feelings of desire, of wanting or of owning and possessing. Passion gets entangled with needing things to be a certain way, with having our expectations met. The expectation of exchange that underlies most passion is both conditional and ultimately defeating. I will love you as long as you behave in the following 15 ways, or as long as you love me in return, at least as much as I love you. It is not a coincidence that the word passion derives from the Latin word for suffering. Wanting and expectation inevitably entails suffering. Okay, so that's one extreme. By contrast, the spirit of loving kindness is unconditional, open, and unobstructed. Like water poured from one vessel to another, loving kindness flows freely, taking the shape of each situation without changing its essence. A friend may disappoint us. She may not meet our expectations, but we do not stop being a friend to her. We may, in fact, disappoint ourselves, may not meet our own expectations, but we do not cease to be a friend to ourselves. So this is our work, is to ferret out when we have attachment to people, we're exaggerating the happiness that we can derive from them. And then as someone mentioned, in a sense, we're using them. We're using them to feel fulfilled in some way. And we have a lot of deep conditioning about this. So it's helpful to look at, what did I learn in my family about love and attachment? There's a lot of rich information there. And see how we're carrying those over into our relationships with each other now. And see what's useful, because there will be genuine love there, and see what's more neurotic and needs to be antidoted. Also, like we were discovering this morning, the stronger our conviction in the disadvantages of attachment, the more we will want to antidote it. We will want to identify it, get to know what's the flavor in my mind, in my body, when attachment is running, so that I can catch it sooner, put it down faster. That's good to identify. And it might be different with different attachments. With people it might look one way, with things it might look another way. With attachment to praise it might look one way or feel one way. Attachment to reputation might be slightly different. It just really depends. And as one teacher said, we were talking about anger, but I think it works equally with attachment. She was saying that the momentum of anger in our mind is like a speeding train. If we try to stop it all at once, we'll have a train wreck. So we just start putting on the brakes, slowly, organically, like we were talking about. There's no need to push above and beyond what we can do right now. That's kindness to ourselves in our practice. That's a kind of acceptance that we all need. Like to really see, okay, this is where I am on my practice. This is what I can do right now easily. This is what I can do with a little bit of effort. And this is beyond me right now, and that's okay. I will get to it. I aspire to get to it. The interesting thing is that as we address our attachment, relationship with family and old friends will naturally change. And sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. Like sometimes when people get involved with Dharma, they find their friends, the people they want to hang out with, it changes. Or the things they engage with their friends changes. You no longer want to go out drinking with them, or, concerts aren't so exciting anymore. Dressing up and doing all the fancy stuff. And that could feel uncomfortable, like, who am I becoming? I just want to stay home and read Dharma books. Who am I becoming? Yeah. You're becoming a Dharma practitioner. It's okay. But we do need Dharma friends, right? We need people that we can talk about our things that are most important to us. So this is why having a place like the Abbey is so important, or having friends where you live, Dharma friends where you live, is so important. A place where you can go and nourish those aspirations in yourself. Monastic life is certainly not for everybody, but as monastics, I think we have a very conducive situation here, because we're encouraged to develop equal regard for all beings. I mean, that's true of all Dharma practitioners, actually, but it's really encouraged here, because we don't want to have special friendships among the monastics. Why? Because that disrupts the harmony. If two people who have a special friendship, then there's jealousy, there's, all sorts of afflictions can arise for others. So we're really encouraged to have equanimity and respect and regard for all of the monastics. And there will be people who we naturally have an affinity with. That's okay, that happens. But if you think about that in the context of developing bodhicitta, there's so much in the teachings about bodhicitta of developing equalizing self with others, or equanimity, as a basis for developing love and compassion for all beings, not just for the people we like, not just for the people who look like us, but for all beings. And that's a really rich practice. So we can do that, we can include that in our relationships. It will only improve our relationships, I think, our primary relationships, our family relationships. Yeah. For lay people with partners and or families or tight networks of friends, there's bound to be attachment mixed with love in our care for others. And again, understanding that attachment is kind of a distorted way of perceiving another person or a relationship, then we want to counter that and develop more of the love so that our relationships will only improve, cultivating more genuine love and compassion and altruism and less unrealistic ideas. So take a moment to reflect for yourself, who are the people you have the strongest attachments for in your life? I think one of the biggest challenges to relationships that we face is that we place so much emphasis on this one life alone. We're really looking at relationships through that lens. This is my family in this life alone, as if that's all there is. And that's a Buddhist worldview. Or this is my partner in this life alone. And there's nothing before and there's nothing after. That really places the focus on that relationship in a way that may not be natural. And some of the teachings that we find in the middle scope of the Lam Rim is to investigate how is it that we exist as a person? How do other people exist as a person? And how is it that we go from life to life? There's a lot of investigation of that, learning about that. And I think what we can come down to is that there is this very subtle continuity of mind that is propelled from life to life. Like we were talking about the other day, like propelled into a different costume or a different hotel room for a period of time. We're just there for a short time, and then we go to a different hotel room or a different costume. But rarely do we think of ourselves as a constantly changing continuity of mind, taking successive rebirths due to karma and afflictions. If we're asked, who are you? That's not what we'd come up with right away. We probably wouldn't even think of that as part of our description. And yet, from a Buddhist point of view, that's more of the reality of who we are. We identify so strongly with this body, this one body we have right now. And even that's changing moment to moment, isn't it? We've seen that. But we identify as if this is who I've always been, this is who I will always be. And so we need to hear teachings, a lot of teachings on that, so that we can really investigate that thoroughly. Fully realized Buddhas are able to perceive our countless lifetimes, where we've lived, what our name was in each life, how we died, what we did in those lives. There's a beautiful description of the Buddha on the night of when he showed the aspect of full awakening under the Bodhi tree in Bodhgaya, that he says he had full recall of all of his past lives and exactly those things, what his name was, where he lived, the family constellation, what he was doing in that life, all the details were there for him because his mind was completely unobscured. He could see all that very clearly. Now, that's what the Buddha said. We don't have that realization for ourselves, and we probably won't for a long time. So then I would just suggest keeping an open mind about that and investigating it in whatever way feels comfortable for us. So as I mentioned before, there are some wonderful stories of people who remember their past lives. They're very compelling when you read them. There's a lot of YouTube videos too, if you want to take a look. There are some studies done by a couple of doctors. Dr. Ian Stevenson, he was the head of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, I believe. And at one point, he switched his career to study rebirths and stories about rebirths. And then his work has been taken over by Dr. Jim Tucker. So and he was applying rigorous, studies, rigorous tools and mechanisms to really ferret out any false stories or, I watched a video of Jim Tucker, and he was saying, with a lot of research, we can't say definitively, how did he say it? We can't prove that things work. We can only say there's enough evidence to suggest that, like a drug, works. You can't say this works in every situation. You can just say, a high majority of people benefit from this drug. And so he was saying, we can say with confidence, based on like 2,500 cases of children remembering their past lives, we could say with confidence that at least some people can remember their past lives clearly. And they were able to substantiate them with, the people that those young children had been associated with in previous lives. So that's interesting. If you're curious about that, take some interest in that. And his books, Dr. Stevenson's books they read more like a scientific approach rather than stories. But those are two very helpful avenues to begin that investigation. We have a pretty large section in our library on rebirth. There are a number of stories of high lamas who remember their rebirths, like the Dalai Lama in one of My Freedom, My People, maybe in that book. I can't remember. Anyway, he recounts how he was identified as the Dalai Lama. He was like a 3-year-old boy when some regents and people he had been associated with came to look for him. And often children would stay in the kitchen with the people who were cooking, kind of like their nannies. And so when travelers would be traveling through Tibet, they would ask if they could stay at different homes because they didn't have a lot of hotels. And so these travelers were shown into the kitchen to have a meal, and the young 3-year-old Dalai Lama started talking to them in a different dialect than he knew. And often when they test these young reincarnations, we're all reincarnates, right? But there are some who have developed their qualities in a different way than we have. They remember their past lives. But when they showed him some articles that the previous Dalai Lama had used, he was able to pick out the ones that had belonged to him as a 3-year-old. So again, those stories are kind of interesting. So when we look at our children or our parents or our siblings or our friends, or our fellow monastics? Do we ever wonder what kind of previous lifetimes we've had together? You know, what brings us, for example, what brings this group of people together this weekend? Isn't that interesting? It's not by chance. There's causes and conditions. We just don't know them. We don't remember them. Jeffrey Hopkins described relationships this way. It's a very powerful metaphor. He says, our relationships with others are like a pot of simmering vegetable soup. Just as in one moment the pea and the carrot come together and then they go apart, in a similar way, we come together in one lifetime as a family member and then we go apart. I had this strong sense when my mother died in 2022. I was there with her when she died, and you know, something, if you have the privilege of being with someone who dies, something leaves the body. Something different happens. Maybe some of you have had that experience too. Something tangible shifts, and the body's still there. And so what is that? What has left? Where does it go? What makes it go? So, you know, with my mother, I'm thinking, okay, she's not in that body that I identify with as my mother. And I think the mother-daughter relationship's one of the strongest. But now I think of her in terms of, or I try to think of her in terms of that mind stream, that subtle, constantly changing mind stream has been propelled into a new rebirth. And if I were to come across her, I wouldn't recognize her. Probably wouldn't recognize her because she'll be in a different body with a different personality. But I can still care for her. I can still care about her very much. I want her to have happiness and the causes of happiness and be free of suffering, the causes of suffering. So if we can think about that in our experiences, immediate experiences in this lifetime, but then we can try to imagine extending that over many lifetimes, right? So it's worth thinking about. And we're encouraged to do this in our practice of bodhichitta. There are two main methods, and the one that's called the 7 cause and effect instruction for developing bodhichitta, it relies on meditating on how every living being has been our mother in previous lives. And probably not just once, but many times. You know, our own mother of this life has been our mother many times in different configurations. That's one way to think about it. So it just starts loosening things up. It loosens up the grasping, and it increases our love, our potential for love of all beings. Yeah. So in the meantime, we can come back to analyzing how we're thinking about our current relationships. So again, I just have some questions that I find helpful. So for instance, do I have expectations of my partner, child, sibling, friend, or pet being in my life in a certain way? I would take them individually, not all together, but I'm just giving you an example of how you can explore. You know, do I expect my special person to be in my life in a certain way? Are there expectations? Am I expecting my special person to make me happy? Am I giving them the responsibility to make me happy? Is my special person responsible for my happiness? What changes would I like to make in the relationship with my special person? so that it's cleaner, clearer, mutually beneficial? What changes would I like to make? What do I find irritating or annoying about my special person? This can tell us a lot about what we're attached to. So what do I find irritating or annoying about my special person, and what attachment underlies that? Does attachment interfere with me having a good relationship with my special person? And if so, how can I address it? Does attachment interfere with me having a good relationship with my special person? And if so, how can I address it? So those are just some thoughts that can get us started looking at our relationship, whether it's a relationship between a parent and an adult child, or an adult child and their parent, or an adult child and their aging parent. That's a special relationship. Between partners, with our pets, with our friends, really investigating what role attachment plays. That will only benefit the relationships. Or maybe you want to add your boss to that list. I don't know. Think about, yeah, you can add whoever you like. Teacher. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we've had a chance to look at our attachment to things, our attachment to our body, how attachment sneaks into our lives in all sorts of motivations, and attachment, just a little bit about attachment to relationships. There are countless other things we could explore, but we're running out of time for our retreat. So I thought of a short Zen exercise that I'd like to do to finish off the retreat, to help us investigate things a little bit more closely. So if you're willing, I would invite you to pair up with another person and decide who's going to be person A and who's going to be person B. Okay, so take a moment. And if you're doing this at home, I hope you have a partner to do it with, and if you don't, you can imagine. I'm sorry. You don't have a partner? Okay, all right. No, no, he's waiting for someone outside. Does everyone have a partner? No, you can't have three. Okay, come on up, Kim.
There's some RFCs, right?
Yes. Can you bring a chair? Can you bring a chair? Okay, so here's the instruction. So who's person A? Raise your hand. And so person A, make sure that you can see this flower. Okay, there's the flower. All right, so person A, you're going to ask, oh wait, no, person B, you're going to ask person A this question for 3 minutes. You're just going to keep repeating this same question. They're going to answer you, but you're going to ask it again. So you're going to ask, what's the essence of this flower? What's the essence of this flower? And so just keep repeating answers. He or she will ask you again, what's the essence of this flower? What's the essence of this flower? We'll do this for 3 minutes. Does somebody have an iPad I could use that has a timer? I forgot to bring. Okay, good, thank you. All right, so in 1 moment, she will start the timer. Can I give you the gong? So let it, okay. What's the essence of the flower? Okay, now switch roles and make sure that you can see the flower. If that's helpful, you can also imagine the flower. But now we'll switch roles and for another 3 minutes. So it's not interrogation, okay? So be gentle, be gentle. Now you say that. And whatever the person says, you just ask, what is the essence of the flower? So there's not a lot of conversation happening. You ask the question, the person answers. You ask the question, the person answers. And try to answer simply. Yeah. No, there's no reflection. You're just asking the same question again and again and again. Okay? All right, so go ahead and set the timer. Oh, I can't see the timer.
Absolutely. It does help. Okay, Venerable. What's the essence of the flower? 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 What's the essence of the flower?
Energy.
What's the essence of the flower?
Connection.
What's the essence of the flower?
Fragility.
What's the essence of the flower? Hurts. What's the essence of the flower?
Labeling.
What's the essence of the flower?
Good question. It's not as I think it is.
What's the essence of the flower?
It's what I perceive.
What's the essence of the flower?
What I
What's the essence of the flower? What's the essence of the flower?
becoming less defined.
What's the essence of the flower?
Yeah, it's really more like energy.
What's the essence of the flower?
Constant change.
What's the essence of the flower? What's the essence of this flower?
An expression of emptiness.
What's the essence of the flower?
Imperceptibility.
What's the essence of the flower? It's that's a good one.
Yes. No, stay. We're not finished, so stay in your places.
Like, whew.
Okay. Listen up. Now we're going to do one more exercise. It's similar. So go back to your other, your first dyad, however that was happening. And now the question is going to be, what's the essence of yourself? So 3 minutes, and give us a bell when we start, please. Tim, what's the essence of yourself?
Socialized constructed.
What's the essence of yourself?
Soul and physical form.
What's the essence of yourself?
Energy.
What's the essence of yourself?
Connection to all that is.
The essence of yourself.
Emptiness.
What's the essence of yourself?
perceived narratives.
The essence of yourself.
Chaos.
What's the essence of yourself?
Loving kindness.
What's the essence of yourself?
Impermanence.
What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself?
Relative.
What's the essence of yourself?
Relationality.
What's the essence of yourself?
Wishing for happiness.
What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself?
Reflex.
What's the essence of yourself?
Complicated.
What's the essence of yourself?
Brilliance.
What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself? The essence of yourself. Okay, so you know what to do. Now you switch roles and continue. You start asking that same question again, gently with presence. Okay. Gently with presence. Yeah. Interest.
What's the essence of yourself?
I wish I knew. Sorry.
I'm supposed to laugh, sorry. Yeah. What's the essence of yourself?
Subtle mind stream going from life to life.
What's the essence of yourself?
Energy.
What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself? What's the essence of yourself?
Karmic theme.
What's the essence of yourself?
Primordial energy.
What's the essence of yourself?
Beginninglessness and endlessness.
What's the essence of yourself?
Vulnerability.
What's the essence of yourself?
Unfindability.
What's the essence of yourself? I'm sorry?
Purity.
What's the essence of yourself?
Sorry, sorry to break my connection, but I can't think of everything.
It's okay.
Expansion.
What's the essence of yourself?
Deep relaxation and peace.
What's the essence of yourself?
Unknowability.
What's the essence of yourself?
Expansion.
What's the essence of yourself?
Ephemeral.
What's the essence of yourself? I'm sure you're talking about. It's interesting. It says, watch how it sinks in. The thing I noticed when you were talking about aging, all the pictures of His Holiness. Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, let's come back together for just a few minutes. What did you discover? Yeah, there's the 3 minutes is a long time. Use the microphone. Thanks.
I didn't discover anything.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? That's the point. Kim, you also had something. That side of the room has their own microphone. Kim had a comment.
It was easy to start, that there were a couple of sort of gimme answers. And then as the time went on and the deeper reflection had to go in, I felt it sort of sinking deeper into my body and recognizing that the jokester and the play and all of that sort of peeled off, and let's say that some of the expected answers or the hoped for answers. And so watching more of the authenticity coming out.
Thank you. What else? Yeah.
Strangely uncomfortable and weird. I mean, these were the thoughts I had. But also, like Kim, there was like I could tell in myself answers that were kind of textbook, and then there were answers that were more authentic.
Yeah.
And I kind of bounced between like trying to formulate it, trying to make it poetic, versus just saying what came to me spontaneously.
Yeah.
So I approached it kind of differently at different times.
Yeah, I found I had to close my eyes to actually answer her, because otherwise I was drawn off by all the stimuli out there. Someone back here? Yeah, Jeffrey.
Different, totally contradictory statements could be true or equally true, or
Can you give an example?
equally nonsensical. Sorry, an example?
Can you give an example?
I said, I'm trying to remember. Okay, for one of my essences of myself was that I was confused. Another one was that I am like a gathering of conditioned capacities.
Yeah.
So that might imply that things are working perfectly fine. Whereas
Sounds pretty
I'm
clear
also
to me.
confused.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Kathy?
Boy, we would go from getting very specific to very broad and back again. So we were part of the universe, but then we were back down to, I'm the sibling of a brother and a sister, and I'm the mother of so and so. And then we would get like, we're Bodhi nature, and we're get really broad. So it was just this sort of closing and opening and getting broad, and it was fun. But 3 minutes was really a long time, and I don't know that I would have thought that much about the flower had I not dug into it. And same, with myself, like defining yourself to someone else is, or even to yourself, parts of that are real easy, and then it got a little harder the longer we went. So I was really glad to hear the bell go off.
The reason I like this exercise is that I think it does get to a point where you kind of feel stumped, like, yeah, that's a good question. Who am I? What is my essence? Yeah. So it's a very subtle way of getting around to, understanding more of our empty nature. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
I'm just bringing this back to attachment to praise and reputation, and I found myself in my head judging my answers before I would give them. Like, does this make me look good or does this make me look bad? Is this a poetic answer? Is this the right answer? So just noticing that I had attachment to how I was being perceived. Not that you were judging me, but I was judging myself.
No one else had that thought.
But yeah, I was just noticing attachment arising even in like the more playful moments of the exercise.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your honesty. Yeah. Okay, well, we've used our time, and I think we've used our time well. And hopefully you have one or two things to think about going away from the retreat. So let's take a moment to rejoice that you had the courage to come here and do this exploration. And we can rejoice that we started each session with a good motivation and we ended with a dedication. And so we have generated a lot of merit by being here together. And we've made new friends and we've done lots of good things. So let's take all that merit and dedicate it in the most extensive way, that it's not just a cause for a little blip of happiness in this one life alone, this one short life alone, but rather let's really dedicate that it becomes causes for all of us to overcome attachment completely, and so that we can be of greater and greater and greatest benefit to every living being. Really try to bring your bodhicitta aspiration into the dedication so that we get the biggest bang for the buck.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
All right, thanks everyone.